Inside America's most isolated prison, the psychology of ADX Florence. Life inside the concrete tomb, where silence screams louder than voices. Imagine a world where silence screams louder than voices, where a man can go days, weeks, even years, without looking another human in the eye. A world where time doesn't pass, it circles endlessly inside 4 inches of reinforced concrete. This isn't a dystopian movie. It's a real place. A fortress buried deep in the mountains of Colorado. Welcome to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, better known as ADX Florence. They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. But for the men who live here, it's something else entirely, a tomb for the living. If you're intrigued by the hidden world inside ADX Florence, make sure to hit like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to follow this journey through the most isolated prison in America. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes. Viewer discretion is advised. The birth of a Supermax. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the American prison system was facing a crisis. Riots had torn through penitentiaries across the country. Marion, Leavenworth, Atlanta. Dozens injured. Guards taken hostage. Entire facilities locked down for months. The federal government needed a new solution. A place that would hold the worst of the worst, inmates too violent, too influential, or too dangerous for any other prison. And so, deep in the high desert of southern Colorado, the Federal Bureau of Prisons built the answer. ADX Florence. According to the Bureau of Prisons official report, 2018, construction began in 1991 and finished 2 years later. By 1994, the gates of the nation's first true Supermax opened to its first 490 inmates. Every brick, every camera, every inch of this facility was engineered for one purpose: complete control. Location and purpose. ADX Florence sits just outside a quiet town called Florence, Colorado, surrounded by rolling hills and barbed wire. But don't let the peaceful landscape fool you. Beyond the surface lies a world designed for total isolation. It's not just a prison, it's the end of the line. Inmates here are transferred after causing chaos in other high-security prisons or leading major criminal organizations from behind bars. Terrorists, gang leaders, serial offenders, and high-profile escape artists all find themselves buried within this concrete maze. Even the Bureau of Prisons describes it as a facility for inmates who require the tightest control. Here, the average inmate spends 22 to 24 hours a day in solitary confinement. There's no yard, no cafeteria, no communal chapel. Just a small, soundproof cell, and the echo of one's own thoughts. The design of control. From above, ADX Florence looks almost like a geometric scar carved into the earth. Symmetrical, cold, efficient. Each unit is shaped like an X, with 4 wings extending from a central control pod. From that pod, guards can see directly down each hallway, controlling doors, cameras, and lights remotely. The National Institute of Justice, NIJ, study calls this architectural dominance, the idea that a building's design itself enforces obedience. Here, architecture is the warden. Inside, every detail has purpose. Walls are made of solid poured concrete, reinforced with steel. Even the furniture, bed, desk, stool, is molded from the same material. Windows are only 4 inches wide, angled toward the sky so inmates can't see the horizon. No skyline. No sunset. Just a thin sliver of light to remind them the outside world still exists. A day in complete isolation. According to the 2018 Bureau of Prisons report, a typical day inside ADX is governed by precision and silence. At 7 a.m., breakfast arrives, slid through a narrow slot called a bean chute. The inmate eats alone, on a concrete desk under fluorescent light. From 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., inmates remain in their cells. They can read, write, or exercise, but even exercise happens alone, in a small concrete pen sometimes called the cage. It's the size of a single-car garage, surrounded by 20-foot walls with a tiny patch of open sky above. There is no contact with other prisoners. No direct human interaction except for brief words with guards during checks. Lunch comes at noon. Dinner around 5. Lights out at 10. Day after day, month after month, year after year. The average inmate in ADX will spend about 23 hours each day in total isolation, sometimes for decades. The human element, guards and systems. Even the correctional officers at ADX rarely see the inmates face to face. Every door, camera, and gate can be operated remotely from the control center. Officers communicate through intercoms, observing behavior patterns, responding to coded signals. Safety is absolute priority, not only to prevent escape, but to prevent harm. Each inmate is carefully classified based on behavior, risk, and mental health indicators. The Bureau of Prisons' 2018 inspection report documents strict internal checks. Inmates are allowed out of their cells for recreation, showers, and limited program participation, all under direct, line-of-sight supervision. Even movement is mechanical. When a prisoner exits the cell, 2 guards escort, while 1 officer watches through a control booth. Handcuffs. Shackles. Step by step. Here, control isn't just physical, it's psychological. The levels of incarceration. ADX Florence is divided into several security levels, each one dictating how much isolation an inmate experiences. General population units, the most restrictive. Total solitary confinement, meals in cell. Intermediate units, limited interactions, increased privileges for good behavior. Pre-transfer units, for inmates showing stability and readiness to move to a lower security prison. The goal, according to the NIJ research, is progressive control. Trust. Move up. See more of the world. But for many inmates, that journey never happens. Some are deemed too dangerous to ever be released into a lower unit. Others deteriorate mentally long before they can adapt. Who ends up here? ADX Florence houses a unique mix of federal inmates. Some infamous, others invisible to the public. But one thing unites them all. The federal government has decided they cannot coexist with anyone else. Among its residents over the years, domestic terrorists, foreign extremists, organized crime bosses. High-profile escape artists. Every prisoner has a reason for being here. An action, an incident, or a level of influence that made them a national security concern. But names and details aren't what this story is about. It's about the system that contains them, and the environment that changes them. The Bureau of Prisons mission statement says ADX exists to safely house inmates requiring the highest level of security. But as years pass, critics and psychologists ask, at what cost? Silence as punishment and design. Inside ADX, silence is both a weapon and a shield. Noise is tightly controlled. Doors are padded, ventilation quiet, voices forbidden. The NIJ Psychological Impact Study describes the experience as a deliberate sensory reduction intended to minimize stimulation and risk. But isolation changes the mind. When there's nothing to hear, the brain invents its own noise. When there's nothing to see, the imagination fills in the gaps. Prisoners have reported hearing phantom voices, feeling invisible touches, or believing the building itself is breathing. These are not myths. They're documented effects of prolonged sensory deprivation. Security and surveillance, the eyes that never blink. Security inside ADX Florence is omnipresent. Over 1,400 surveillance cameras monitor every inch of movement. Every cell door, light, and microphone can be controlled from central command. There are motion detectors in corridors, infrared sensors, and trip alarms buried in the walls. Even the mail is screened before it reaches inmates. According to the 2018 Bureau of Prisons report, there hasn't been a successful escape in the facility's history. Every inmate who has entered since its opening has stayed there, until transfer, death, or release by court order. The prison's internal saying goes, at ADX you can move, but you can't hide. The rhythm of endless time. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. In the outside world, people measure time by events, birthdays, seasons, news headlines. Inside ADX Florence, Time is measured by the shift of fluorescent lights and the sound of a food tray sliding through steel. For inmates, the sameness becomes oppressive. One former warden described it in the NIJ report as a controlled sensory diet, enough to survive, but never enough to feel alive. When the mind becomes the prison, ADX Florence was built to keep the outside world safe, and by most measures, it succeeds. But what happens inside those walls raises a deeper question. What happens to a human mind when it's locked away for years in silence? When conversation, sunlight, and touch become privileges instead of rights? Can a man's psyche survive the weight of such solitude? In the next chapter, we'll go beyond the concrete, into the psychological toll that isolation takes. Because here in Florence, Colorado, the walls don't just confine the body. They reshape the mind. The psychology of control. The blueprint of obedience. Every inch of ADX Florence was engineered not only to confine, but to condition. Architects call it behavioral design. From the Bureau of Prisons' 2018 inspection, planners believed discipline should come not from guards shouting orders, but from the environment itself. Light, temperature, routine, each calibrated to remove unpredictability. No corners hide from view. No doors open without a command pulse from the control booth. Even the temperature stays constant, between 68 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, neutral, emotionless, unchanging. The system doesn't just lock men in. It teaches them that resistance is futile. The science of isolation. According to the NIJ grant report, Entombed in Isolation, researchers identified 3 distinct psychological stages for inmates held in long-term solitary. Shock and resistance. The mind fights back, filled with anger, rebellion, disbelief. Withdrawal and disorientation. Days merge, sleep collapses, memory blurs. Acceptance or breakdown. A quiet surrender. Some adapt, others fracture. One psychologist described it simply. At ADX Florence, time doesn't rehabilitate, it erases. Inmates begin talking to themselves, carving messages into concrete, pacing hundreds of miles a year inside a space smaller than a parking spot. The Bureau of Prisons' 2018 data recorded that more than 70% of ADX inmates reported periodic cognitive disorientation, forgetting what day it was or how long they'd been there. The staff perspective. It's easy to imagine the guards as faceless enforcers, but inside ADX Florence, many correctional officers face their own psychological toll. A 2017 NIJ staff wellness study found that Supermax personnel experience higher levels of sleep disruption and hypervigilance than officers in any other federal facility. They work behind glass and steel, yet constantly sense tension humming beneath the silence. Every shift requires perfect composure. One lapse in judgment, and an inmate could exploit it. One retired officer, interviewed for the NIJ study, said, "You don't raise your voice here. You don't show emotion. The building does the talking." In a place where even communication is automated, empathy risks becoming weakness. The rules of existence. ADX operates on a code of precision, dozens of written rules that regulate everything from letter size to shower time. Mail is inspected and read by intelligence staff before delivery. Phone calls are monitored and limited, often one 15-minute call per month. Recreation must be requested 24 hours in advance, and denial is common. For most, contact with family is reduced to paper. Letters that arrive weeks late, heavily redacted in black ink. These controls are not arbitrary. The Bureau of Prisons classifies every interaction as a potential security breach. Even a short sentence could contain a coded order to the outside world. This meticulous structure maintains order, but at a human cost. The NIJ report concluded, control, in its purest form, offers safety but dissolves identity. Echoes of the outside world. Occasionally, the outside world seeps in. A television newscast during supervised programs, a headline about a court ruling, or the sound of thunder beyond concrete walls. Those tiny reminders ignite memory. An inmate hears rain and remembers childhood summers. He smells dust from the ventilation and recalls a desert road. Psychologists call this memory flooding. moments when suppressed emotion overwhelms the controlled environment. Some inmates cry. Others rage. Most simply sit in silence until the feeling passes. The architecture of punishment. ADX Florence was designed to remove the possibility of escape, but it also removed the concept of distance. A prisoner can walk 10 paces one direction, 10 back, and that's his world. The NIJ researchers mapped the sensory profile of the cells. Visual field, 90% gray concrete, 10% light slit. Acoustic range, below 35 decibels. Quieter than a library. Tactile variation, virtually none. Surfaces identical, temperature constant. Humans, evolutionarily built for complexity and unpredictability, begin to degrade in this uniformity. Some find solace in routine. Others report a slow feeling of unreality, as if the world outside might no longer exist. The ritual of recreation. When the steel door finally opens for recreation, it's both liberation and reminder. Inmates step into a space barely 10 by 20 feet, surrounded by 20-foot concrete walls and covered with heavy mesh. They can look up, see a square of sky, but never beyond. The Bureau of Prisons calls it individualized outdoor exercise. Prisoners call it the cage. One inmate's account, cited in the NIJ study, described the moment succinctly. You breathe air, but it's still prison air. Most spend the hour pacing, stretching, or simply standing still, savoring sunlight on skin before being led back inside. Technology as the wall. Modernization has only deepened ADX's sense of control. Since 2018, the Bureau of Prisons introduced automated tracking systems and digital incident logs. Each inmate's behavior is quantified: mood reports, movement frequency, rule compliance, building a data profile used to predict potential risks. These metrics decide privileges: a book, a phone call, or a transfer to a lower unit. But for the inmates, the algorithm feels like another invisible guard, an unseen authority judging every breath. One NIJ analyst noted, technology replaced interaction. Efficiency replaced empathy. The cost of perfect order. By design, ADX Florence has almost no riots, no escapes, no large-scale violence. In terms of security, it is a masterpiece. But the NIJ researchers ask, what price do we pay for perfect order? They documented rising cases of self-harm, hallucinations, and sleep disorders despite immaculate discipline records. The human body remains contained, but the mind begins to unravel. Even staff psychologists, quoted in the Bureau of Prisons report, admit that long-term confinement challenges fundamental human needs for stimulation and social connection. Control has achieved its mission, but at the expense of humanity. The voice in the walls. When conversation is forbidden, prisoners invent ways to communicate, tapping Morse-like rhythms through pipes, sliding notes inside book covers, a whisper exchanged through the ventilation shaft, fleeting, dangerous, vital. For them, these tiny rebellions are proof of existence. They risk punishment not to conspire, but to feel human. A former warden wrote in the NIJ review, inmates will always find ways to reach out. It's not defiance, it's survival. The illusion of choice. Choice inside ADX Florence is an illusion, but an important one. Guards offer limited decisions. Do you want your meal now or in 10 minutes? Would you like to shower first or later? Small freedoms, crafted to give inmates a sense of control within control. Psychologists say these microchoices reduce aggression and preserve fragments of autonomy. It's a delicate balance, offering just enough agency to prevent psychological collapse, but never enough to challenge authority. The impact on identity. Long-term isolation erodes self-perception. Without external reference, no social feedback, no physical variety, inmates struggle to maintain identity. The NIJ report called it ego thinning. A gradual fading of the sense of I. Some cope by creating rigid routines, doing the same number of push-ups daily, reading the same pages of the same book. Others withdraw completely, staring at the ceiling for hours, trapped in thought loops that never resolve. One clinical observer wrote, After enough time, a man stops thinking of himself as a person serving a sentence. He becomes the sentence. The unseen sky. From the floor of the cell, the sky appears as a thin rectangle, 4 inches wide, 3 feet high. Through it, inmates track the seasons by light color alone. Winter is pale blue, summer, a deeper glare. One psychologist noted that simply seeing birds fly overhead could trigger emotional outbursts, tears, laughter, or silence. For those moments, nature exists again, proof that freedom is real somewhere. The paradox of protection. ADX Florence was built to protect society from the dangerous few. It succeeded. No large-scale violence has escaped its walls in over 2 decades. But within those walls, new questions rise. Can absolute security coexist with human dignity? The Bureau of Prisons insists it can, citing compliance with federal mental health standards and structured step-down programs. Yet researchers warn that isolation itself may violate basic psychological needs, regardless of treatment offered. The mind as a cell. In ADX Florence, confinement isn't just a physical sentence, it's a psychological experiment in endurance. The walls are silent, but they speak, reminding every man inside that control is absolute, and escape is not about bars, it's about the mind. But what happens when the mind fights back? When isolation begins to rewrite thought itself? That's where the story truly deepens. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the brain adapts, fractures, and sometimes breaks under the weight of endless solitude. Because here, in America's most isolated prison, the real battleground isn't made of concrete. It's made of consciousness. If you found this story powerful, hit like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for the next episode in this real-life prison documentary series. This was Chapter 1 of our journey into ADX Florence, America's most isolated prison. In the next episode, we'll go deeper into the mind, where silence becomes sound and time becomes the enemy. Don't miss it.